In this episode, I sat down with my friend Felipe Engineer, who happens to be an engineer. We had a lovely conversation that included things like correct foundations within the infinite banking concept. We discussed family dynamics, covering more than one generation. We talked about entrepreneurship. We even discussed the power of the infinite banking concept when things go wrong. We had fun, and I hope you enjoy listening. Thank you.
My son's 13. We've had some, and like I said, we've been doing this for 5 years. Some years ago, James, he even wanted to get a smartphone. And this, we're the type of parents who are like, yeah, you're going to be responsible for it. So I said, you're going to buy your phone using cash values from the policy that on you that I control. And you're going to pay that back every month with income that you're getting from allowances and a little bit of work you're doing. And he ended up paying that phone off early. And now, fast forward to now, we're getting new phones because that's what you have to do in this world, James. Everything gets recycled, and we're going to have to get new phones because they become obsolete. And so now we're getting new phones. We're doing the same thing again. And of all the phones we're turning in, his actually has the highest value. So I told my son, like, your new phone is the cheapest because you got the biggest discount because you paid your phone off early and you've owned it for a long time. So congratulations, son. You saved the most money, between among the three of us. And so he's going to get the same phone as mom and dad. So all three of us are going to have the same exact phone. And, he's 13. And some of his friends have like what I would just call burner phones. Like they can only do like limited things. And, for whatever reason, how their parents are doing it with their kids. But it's like, this is just cool that he can learn how to finance it because he's still financing it through his system, and he gets the benefit of having it. And when he paid it off, I showed him. I said, "Here's what your policy was forecasted to do if we had not used it, and here's what it's doing now." Like when it started, James, the death benefit was less than $1 million, and now just with a little bit of usage, the death benefit's now over $1 million, and it's grown. And it's growing and it's outperforming. So I'll say like every policy that I've had is far outperforming all the original illustrations because of what I've done with the policies.
That's pretty powerful. I mean, that's very powerful. Well, here he is. He's 13 years old, and you've got the cell phones. My gosh, they cost an arm and a leg. No they question. But then you're talking about mentioned education. He goes to public school now, but you're kicking around possibilities there. That costs money. The private schools, that costs money.
Yeah, it's like college tuition.
Yeah. Well, you got to pay for that and the school taxes, too, for all of the unbaptized babies out there. Nothing but love, I'm just saying the unwashed masses, however they classify us.
I'm a product, James. We got to go back for a second because I was a product of public school education, and a lot of people don't know this, but I actually graduated valedictorian of my class back in 1990, whatever. Barely remember when it was, but I was number one of 700 people. And when I have a pretty good memory, I'm thinking back, we had one class on economics, just one. In 4 years of school, one time we covered economics, and they do such a heavy-handed Adam Smith micro economics. They touch on some personal finance. And I talked to friends that were in the non-honors track that had home economics, and they actually learned more. They learned more, James, in home economics than we did in economics for people going to university.
Wow.
And it's only because we had friends that went through those classes that I realized there's things that I'm not learning. Like I'm in the same school, same people, and I'm not learning about home economics. And like, I think back now, like how insane it sounds that you got people coming all the way through school. By the time you're getting out of high school, you're over 12 years, you're approaching 2 decades of schooling. And the chances of you having had some education on personal finances is about zero. It's about a 0% chance for a lot of people. And so even when I was in graduate school getting my master's in business, we had a handful of classes on accounting, which just teaches you how to count the money you have in different ways. And it's more legal. And for people that are listening, James, and you're laughing, like for accounting.
Well said. Yeah.
It's more understanding the law and regulations with financial reports than actual counting. And then we had some classes on finance, which was understanding the time value of money. And finance is mostly focused on just money today versus money in the future, and making just business decisions based on your money, which Nelson talked about beautifully in Becoming Your Own Banker. And I think in the one single chapter, Nelson did a better job than the 2 courses that I had at the graduate level in school, talking about the time value of money and making it super relatable. So for the listeners out there, like there's some real nuggets of wisdom there, and to understand. So now I was telling James before, when I make decisions and I have a spreadsheet where I track what my policies are doing, current performance, and I'll even forecast a year, and I'll look down illustrations and forecast out 10, 20, 30 years into the future. I'm making decisions on the long term. And then I'm also talking to my son, and I said, there are things that we have to do, and I might even have to record myself, James, because just in case something happens to me, I'm going to make a series of videos for you with some lessons that you're going to learn that you've got to carry forward so that the system perpetuates. You literally will have an infinite machine, an infinite energy perpetual machine that in your own personal banking system that you can do practicing IBC, which you're not going to learn in school. You're not going to learn in a book. You need to learn by doing it yourself. And I think no matter how you start with just one policy. You can practice this and grow a system for yourself and take more responsibility and have all these benefits, even with just one policy. You don't have to get crazy like me and get so many.
Yep. I'm with you there. The economics at the you and me level, the work that Nelson done is just can't be beat, in my opinion. The economics at the you and me level, Austrian economics at the you and me level, simply, understandably, and beyond the narrative of the financial planning world, and it boils it down to, no question, the time value of money. Oh my gosh. And then the rate of return. That's all the focus. None of the curriculum in school, college, I don't care what track you want to go down. None of them, not a single one of them, address banking. Not a single one of them. Not one. So, very simply, when you introduce the idea that you can control the banking function in your life as it relates to you, and just the idea that can be done is new and different. It's like, what? Just like when you first seen the book that the algorithms fed up to you, Becoming Your Own Banker. It's like, that's well named and worth a read to discover the possibility that you can become your own banker. And then go on deep enough to understand what it would mean to you, what it could mean to you and your family. That's extremely powerful. And then, Nelson said it many times, we're not getting above 3rd grade math. It's a beautiful thing. But, going back to your son, he's 13, the cell phones, in a couple of years, he's going to want an automobile. And then we were already talking about education, right? And then higher education, you go off to university and that costs money. Then he's going to probably meet some beautiful young lady there. They cost money, right? Oh my gosh. Then he's going to come home.
Costs. Yep. At one time, I was working 3 jobs in school because I had to support my lifestyle of going to school and, being able to go on dates and pay for it myself. Like, having a life takes money, and you've got to have a way to get it. And there's even another great book called The Richest Man in Babylon, which talks about a slave in Babylon eventually buying his own freedom by practicing some really basic concepts. And, that type of thinking, these processes are universal and true. And if you can understand the process, you'll know exactly what to do.
Yep. I agree. You mentioned last time we talked, The Millionaire Next Door. That was another book that Nelson recommended. Yeah, Nelson. I tried to just read all the stuff Nelson recommends, James, because
I figure the more I study what he studied, the deeper my understanding of what inspired him to come up with IBC will just get stronger. I'll have a better foundation. So Nelson talked about The Millionaire Next Door. And in that book, it's really shocking, especially here in the United States, where this country is producing quite a few millionaires. But even in that, and I read that book and I highly recommend that book as well. That book does a great job of even showing people that are high income earners that are living check to check, paycheck to paycheck, and that are poor, versus people that can warehouse their money in a way, let it grow without exposing it to the shenanigans of the market. And it's not an IBC book, but it just talks about, what people that are independently wealthy do versus people that are living check to check. And I think for me, that was a great example. And there's stories about like what kind of cars do they drive? What kind of houses do they live in? What neighborhoods are they in? And all that was just so fascinating because as growing up blue collar child of two blue collar parents, and my parents both had to work in order to put food on the table. Like that's something that you don't always get to see. Now that I'm older and I'm an entrepreneur and I run several businesses and I advise even a tech startup, James, I'm walking in different circles of people now. So I actually know some millionaires and I know a few billionaires, and they're interesting people, especially the billionaires. They're very interesting. They're very interesting. A lot of people look up to them like, there's some kind of magical and creatures, right? But if you go study like how they actually got that way, it's just process things. And then some people, for the very wealthy, typically, not always, but typically, they come from a long line of very successful people, and their parents just pass on that type of successful thinking and practices to them. They're not smarter than you are. They're not smarter than I am. They've just had the benefit of having a better education around finance and money, the thing that no one's taught in school. And I think, James, it's telling that it's consistently not taught, that it's by design.
What? Oh, you mean there's a narrative? Yeah. Yep. No, I agree completely with that. Personally, I grew up, to say blue collar might be, being generous. But, my parents worked hard. My dad was very smart. He was an entrepreneur and did a lot of different businesses. And, it kind of reminds me of Jim Rohn. I'm a student of Jim Rohn. And
so am I.
Yeah. He said, one time, he said many things. I love him. But, it's hard to get rich fast. It's easy to become wealthy, over the long term with time. And I'm paraphrasing, but he said it's hard to get rich fast, but it's easy to become wealthy over the long term. Something along those lines. It's hard to get rich fast. It's easy to get wealthy slow is pretty much. But when I was growing up, my parents didn't teach me finance and economics. My father, demonstrated entrepreneurship. No question about that. And I grew up with a lot of my friends, their family or their parents, grew up and I'm in the South, as if you couldn't tell. Let me help you out by my accent, right?
Well, I can tell.
But they, a lot of them had factory jobs, and, is stay with the company forever, get a pension, retire and die early because, the man has his identity wrapped up in his profession. And, you go through the layoffs and the workman's comp or unemployment when you're laid off, and you see the savings accumulate while they're at work, and then when they're laid off, the savings are dwindled down to nothing. And that, I knew I didn't want that growing up, right? And I knew I could see my dad work and produce and become very successful over time. And I knew I wanted that. But he didn't teach me economics. He taught me some very basic, fundamental truths, no question, that I rely on, become part of my foundational philosophy. No question, but he didn't teach me. He didn't know anything about banking other than to have a good relationship with bankers, and let the banker make a little money. So this desire to learn, and I know you have it as well. You're a voracious reader and you want to do better. That was instilled in me. But there was a steep, accelerated learning curve, prior to meeting Nelson, because I've been an entrepreneur, since high school and even in high school. So that was always kind of going against the grain, outside the norm, different than what my friends and colleagues were pursuing and how that they were going about life. So there's an acceleration prior to Nelson, but then there was a greater acceleration after meeting Nelson and learning the banking function. It's been incredible for me personally and professionally, and then for my clients. But it's not, there's no formal education anywhere. You're not going to go to any school, any college. You're not going to take any kind of designation coursework within the financial, industry and learn about banking. It's just not going to happen. And like you said, it may be on purpose. Well, look, if the life insurance company, didn't teach the agent this idea that you can become your own banker, collateralizing the cash values of life insurance. And everybody knows or very aware that just because you have cash value and permanent, policies, there's a loan provision in a life insurance contract. No question about that. Everybody's familiar with that, or, that's familiar with life insurance. But the idea that controlling the banking function to the extent, the scale that Nelson added, you're just not going to learn that anywhere. And then, of course, it's more than likely by design, because if these life insurance companies have been in business over 100, 150, 200 years, why didn't they teach their agents this? Why did it take Nelson Nash in 1980 to discover this, and the trauma that he went through, and rightly so, to learn this idea that you can control the banking function? Well, if the life insurance company didn't teach them, why didn't they teach that? Either they knew or they didn't know, right? If they didn't know, then, God bless them, you have an opportunity to learn. If they did know, then it's a narrative. They don't want you to collateralize the cash values. They think that they know better than you what to do with capital that you can control. So my point here is that there is no formal education on controlling the banking function at the you and me level. Now, you can go get all kinds of degrees in the finance world and all kinds of education to get into the banking world if you wish. There's a lot out there, but not how to control the banking function at the you and me level. Just doesn't exist. And so we're all pretty much late in life. I don't care how old you are when you discover this. I think I was 41-ish, 41 when I met Nelson, after 14 years in the life insurance business. Man, after I got over my anger, I'm like, okay, this is Katie bar the door. Let's get to it. So we're all playing catch up. And so whenever you implement this idea for yourself, and then you start thinking generationally, because you don't have enough place to put money, because your warehouse isn't big enough, or all the capital that you are enjoying flowing through your personal economy, whatever the reason, when you start putting policies in force on your parents, the people that you have insurable interest in within your family, it's, you do this over one or two generations and you have a perpetual machine. It is absolutely possible to have a perpetual machine, but it's not going to happen unless you, the listener, you, Felipe, me, James Neathery, unless we do something. Right. And we're doing it, and we're just encouraging others to consider the possibility that you can do it too. So thanks for letting me go on that rant.
You're so welcome. And James, when I've talked to people about this, because some people ask me, like, how is it that you can do all the stuff you do? Like, we turn around, follow you on social media, and you're like traveling all over the world, all over the United States. And I was like, well, it's because I'm in control. I'm taking control and making decisions, with looking at purpose first. And when I got into this IBC the problem I was trying to solve was onerous taxation. That was my first problem. For one, I obviously I sucked at selling. I couldn't sell at a level to overcome the taxes. But when you're first starting out, you're probably not going to be awesome in your business either. Most businesses fail in the first 10 years, right? And I think even Becoming Your Own Millionaire or The Millionaire Next Door, in that book, I think they even give some startling statistics on, businesses and some interesting research there. So I was like, I need to not have this happen again. So I had to start learning. I recognized I didn't know enough. I needed to learn more. And I still don't know enough. I'm still learning. I tell my son, like, I'm just figuring it out like every day myself. Like, I've got some ideas and some theory, and I practice and I experiment and I try things. But to get to this level is taking time and study. But it's not, I want to caution everybody, like, it's not enough to read Nelson's book. And I have probably bought 50 of Nelson's books and given it to people. And of those 50, one has actually done something with it so far. Wow. Right? Because it's just so different. I think 40 to 48 people didn't read it. And even though it's only, 90 plus pages, because people are so conditioned, James, that if I just do everything else that everybody else is doing, I'm going to be fine. But people, you got to realize that if you fast forward to the end of your life, you might not be fine. And when I did the math, James, and I fast forwarded to the end of my life, I realized I was not fine. And I was going to leave my family in a bad situation. So by taking responsibility and making some changes, and like I said, the only real difference is where I put my money first. Everything else, how we live, is the same. I even was telling my wife in the early days, and we're so nerdy here, James, in the engineer house, that we'll have quarterly financial review meetings to look at everything in the untimely event. Yeah, it's in the untimely event that I graduate. I don't want there to be any surprises and people to worry about, like, where do I find this information? It's all at my wife's fingertips or at my son's fingertips. As he gets older, we expose him to more as he's mature and ready for it. So, like, solving that problem is the game changer. And then it's just a small process step. And then as we've done this, and I've had to pay premium payments, I've asked my wife and son, I said, before we had this, so prior to when I started this when I was 39, I'm 43 now, or started when I was 38, whatever the math is. That's why I have to use a calculator and spreadsheets, James, because simple math is not my strong suit. But I said, from your perspective, what's different? Like, has the quality of your life gone down? I've asked both of them this multiple times. And they always tell me, no, actually, the quality of our life has gone up. It's actually gone up every time. And a year ago, I told you the story, James. I called you on a Saturday. It was May of last year. I had lost a significant amount of money in crypto. Like, it just evaporated in a matter of hours. In a couple of hours, I lost a significant amount of money. I'm not going to say how much it was, but it was substantial. And I watched people that were involved in that particular coin on Twitter, because that's where a lot of the information in the community was. And people were committing suicide in mass numbers. And people were on there talking about relatives that had died. I mean, this was a catastrophic thing. And when I called James on a Saturday, and James remembers, like, the tone of my voice and how I sounded. And I said, I felt bad for about 8 minutes, maybe 10. When it happened and I realized the gravity of what had happened, it was only that short because I realized it was the life insurance company's money that I lost and not mine. My money continued to grow uninterrupted compound interest. And all I had to do was just pay back loans that I was already paying back anyway. Now I just had to pay them back myself. I had to get more creative in business. And I thought, the pie is not fixed. All I have to do is get more creative and I will be able to overcome this. And some years ago when I started the businesses that I'm in now, I look at how we performed and it was like at this level where I'm holding my hand. So the listeners, I'm holding my hand at about a level of my heart. And then after that catastrophe happened, And it was devastating. Like the number was huge. But after that, I just thought, okay, how can I get more creative and overcome this? I figured at the time, James, I thought it's going to take me about 3 years, maybe 5 at my current outcome, my current rate of production and my own business to overcome this. James, I came back and recovered from that in less than a year. And now I'm operating at a much higher level. So much so that my financial advisor is telling me to shift my priorities because I'm having so much success. And I told him, I said, this came from overcoming a problem. I wanted to bounce back and be stronger than I was then. And I ran the numbers recently, James, in preparation for this interview. And we're tens of thousands of dollars to the better than I was a year ago. It's just incredible. And I was calm and I stayed cool, and I called James. And in the beginning, for people listening, I couldn't even talk about it. And James asked me to do a write-up or come on the show at that time, and I was still processing it, and I couldn't yet talk about it. And now that it's been a year and I overcame that, and we're back stronger now than we were a year ago, it's just all possible thanks to the work of Nelson and the work of you, James, and what you're doing with your clients and people. And I'm telling you, people, that when I go and I do talks and I speak at conferences all the time, and I get questions on process changes, and sometimes we talk about money, especially when we're talking about, multi-$100 million, billion-dollar construction projects. And I'll tell everybody is super fascinated on finances and money, and especially personal economy, like James said. I was at a conference last week in Boston, and it was about social media. But when we got to the topic about, what am I doing it for, and personal finances, that sparked questions for 2 days straight. Like every day I had to talk. People are asking me more questions about personal finance. Nobody even asked me about social media anymore. But that was like it was a 1 hour talk, James. And I was looking this morning as I woke up, getting ready for this show. I still have 3 unread messages from people from that conference, follow-up questions about personal finance. I mean, this is something significant.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that phone call up last May. It was on a Saturday. Felipe calls, I answer the phone, and this is my recollection, Felipe. You said, James, I just wanted to call you and, share some information with you, and thank you for helping me, get started or continue the infinite banking concept, practicing this idea, becoming your own banker. And then you expanded upon that. You had an experience that just sometimes outcomes don't occur as we wish. It's a bad experience, a substantial loss in cryptocurrency. But and I'm sitting here listening, it's my friend Felipe. He's sharing with me, and I want to hear all the good things that, my clients experience. And, this was not necessarily one of those good things, right? And he's expanding on this, and I'm wondering, I'm like, he just lost a substantial amount of money in cryptocurrency, but you're calling to thank me about the infinite banking concept. I'm like, okay, help me make those connections. And you did. You said, this is what I had done. This is what happened. This was, of course, not the expected outcome. But I don't have to start all over. I don't have to, burn the policies down and start all over. All I have to do is continue repaying the loans. Now, it'll be, somewhat differently going forward, how exactly those loans are repaid. And I'm telling you, I was very impressed. It made a great impression on me. Of course, I'm appreciative of, being a part of, our clients' lives and helping make good things happen. That's what drives me. But that was very powerful. You lost a substantial amount of money. Most people, a lot of people would have just said, okay, I'm done. I'm done. And just move on, not worry about the loan repayments, redirect the premium to recover or whatever. But you said, no, I don't have to start all over. All I have to do is keep doing what I'm doing, making the loan repayments. And it's very powerful and very true. But it took courage and discipline to make that happen. It separates, some of these big financial, train wrecks can, separate the men from the boys, right? But that was very impressionable upon me. And I've mentioned it in a broad sense without any kind of details, because it's very powerful. If you maybe, let's say we put all of our money in the stock market or wherever, I don't want to beat up any type of market, but you invest in something and it collapses, whether it's a liquidity crisis in real estate or, valuations plummeting in different markets. And when your money goes to zero, what do? You got to rebuild. Right, as opposed to building capital with life insurance that by contract you control and have access to, and then collateralizing that. The money's not even in the policy. The money never even left the policy. You collateralize the cash values of the life insurance policy that you have the contractual right to do. And just like you said, you're borrowing the life insurance company's money. Now you're on the hook, right? You created a loan and you should be an honest banker and repay the loans. That money was lost. And I love the way you put distinction between you and the life insurance company's money, where you can I didn't even lose my money. It was the life insurance company's money. It's interesting, but very powerful on what happened. And now here, and I'm sure that caused a lot of changing in thinking, behavior, I don't know, but now your reasoning at that time was 3 to 5 years to recover, and you did it in a year or less, and you're less if you're ahead of the game in a year. That's pretty dang powerful, and I don't believe you really could have done that. I know I couldn't have done that without the solid foundation of the previous years. I don't know how many policies you owned up until that point in time, but you already had a good foundation in infinite banking, understanding Nelson's work. And so you had a solid foundation to be able to walk through that, my opinion. And so thanks for bringing that up.
With my head held high. And what a lesson learned. And I told my son, I said, what an amazing education that loss had, because it made me understand deeper the financial markets. And I traced back watching the news and even engaged some law firms on what happened. And I realized this is just an extension of the very same thing that we abdicate, is responsibility. And it's a lot, cryptocurrency, and, people, I'm sure this is going to get some comments because people are very polarized on this. But if you can't understand the rules clearly and simply, it's probably a scheme of some kind. So I learned to recognize that. But a lot of even the traditional banking that we just take for granted is a scheme. Just like the Federal Reserve private company. And a lot of people are like, what do you mean it's a private company? Yeah, the Federal Reserve is a private company. That's a scheme too. And it's just the game that we're playing in, James. And I think understanding what the game is that's what I've tried to instill in my own son, and talking about this with my family. This is just a game. And one of the games that Nelson recommended in the book is called Cash Flow by Robert Kiyosaki. And Robert Kiyosaki is an interesting character, especially if you watch his stuff now. But the first time he wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he co-authored it with a woman named Sharon Lechter. And a lot of people don't know that Sharon Lechter was part of the original team to make that book. And Sharon has dedicated her life to financial literacy for youth and individuals. And she's an extremely well-published author in her own right. And I actually had a chance to meet her some years ago at a conference. And I told Sharon, I said, what you've done with laying out these stories and your work on financial literacy with people, it's something that we need to celebrate more. And more people need to know this, because it's not taught and not well known. And so that's the lesson for me was I violated in the Richest Man in Babylon, there's 5 rules for gold. And I violated one of the rules of gold. If you try to make your money work too hard, it'll run away from you. And it obviously did, because we were in that crypto, James, so we were getting returns of north of 19% at one point in time. And then it, just as fast as it came, it went even faster. And so that's like a lot of people, they get hung up on rates of return. And I've had to have this conversation with my own financial advisor. When we look at, what's happening on an illustration to determine your rates of return at different times, because it's compound interest, it's an exponential curve. And people don't recognize, like, an exponential curve is not linear. Like, we're conditioned to think linear, even though as a human being, everything you experience is logarithmic. So compound interest is more natural to us than we know, but we don't recognize it because of how we're taught and conditioned. And so, like, as time goes on, you've got to don't just look at what's happening in year one. And like when James was talking about collateralizing policies, here I am, I've been practicing this for over 5 years. And only when I have my birthday in February will one of my policies be 100% collateralized and go cross the threshold where it starts to take off with wind in its sail or tailwind in its back. And then what I mean by that is, like, in the beginning, as the entity is coming up this contract with you and the life insurance company, it takes some time to pay the fees, pay the expenses, startup costs, to run the business before the compound interest catches up, and it just needs time. But at some point in the future, I'll put $1 in and more than $1 will come out. And that's going to happen with one policy in February. I'm going to put premium dollars in, and the amount that's going to become available to me as cash values will be in excess of the premium dollars I just gave it. And that policy is going to be now flying with tailwind. And then there's a series of policies behind it that in subsequent years, the same thing will happen. And I have some, James, that it's going to take 12 years for them to get to that point because of how they were designed. But the ones that I've done with you are very efficient, James. They're very efficient.
That pleases me. As you mentioned that, this parity, crossover, equilibrium, whatever you want to call it, it's just a point in time in the future. And a lot of times within the infinite banking footprint, we get lost on illustrations, and like that's an incredibly important time. Not necessarily, the most important thing in my opinion is, a proper structure of the policy. And then, because once it's a proper structure, it's like a tool, and I don't want to diminish dividend paying whole life insurance in this idea down to a tool, but there's a tool for every job, and every job requires a particular tool. I learned that from my brother, who he's graduated now, he's passed on, but he was an incredible craftsman. He could do anything, right? In construction, he could, from concrete to framing to finish to flooring to AC, electrical, and plumbing. He is incredibly talented, and I learned that from him, that every job requires a tool, and you can take the wrong tool to the right job, and the outcome is going to be less than efficient, right? Right. Anyway, so that point in time where total cash value equals cumulative premium, right? So cumulative premium equaling cumulative cash value, and yours coming up on, is February your birthday, or is that
That's
like
right.
an anniversary? Okay.
Yeah,
and then you have some that are 12 years old. I'm just sharing with you, my friend, I have policies that are, they'll be 18 or 19 years old this year that have just barely hit that equilibrium or just passed it in the last year or two, right? But you know what? It is what it is. I didn't know what I know. I didn't know then what I know now. And going back to the illustration, the unseen, that back to Frederick Bastiat, the 18th century philosopher, right? He wrote an essay. He wrote many essays. One of them is titled "That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Unseen." So the seen and the unseen. Okay. So we can look at a life insurance illustration. We can see the numbers. We can go on and get an annual report and see what the values are. Total death benefit, total cumulative premium paid, total cash values, total, loan available, total outstanding loan. We can see all those numbers. What you cannot see and especially in a policy like mine that I'm referring to that maybe just crossed over that point. I think it was about 16 or 17 years is when it happened, okay? What you can't see is the trips to Europe that I've taken my family on. What you can't see is the dental expenses that thing financed or was financed with those cash values. Can't see the automobiles and the health insurance deductibles. You can't see the credit cards. You can't see all of the activity that those cash values participated in, right? And there's no way to calculate the interest that was saved, right, by collateralizing those cash values and practicing this infinite banking concept at the UME level. But we can see the current values, and we can make those, those connections. Well, I paid in, X number of dollars and I have that much in cash value. And tell me, what is more valuable? That which I'm seeing that I can see, or that which was unseen? I remember, in my opinion, it's the unseen. I remember the first time that I went to Europe. Okay, it wasn't the first time I was outside of the country. And I'm a country boy from Johnson County, Texas. The mere fact that I'm even talking about European vacations and trips is mind-boggling to me, okay? All right. But the first time I went with some friends, I have an attorney friend. Well, he's retired now, a history buff. All these guys were history buffs. And anyway, he's out of Chicago, and he used to put these trips together to Normandy, France, and they're all history buffs, right? And big World War II history buff. So, he invited me and said, James, won't you come? There's about 7 or 8, they're attorneys, physicians, they're all across the country. And he would put these trips together. And they were fabulous tours that you can't even, it would be difficult to replicate the tours, right? He did this for years. Anyway, so I go to, I talk to Jana no, let me back up. Before that, okay, the year before that, a gentleman invited me. He said, James, we're putting together a trip for Nelson and Mary, and we're going to go to Vienna, Austria, the 100-year anniversary of Mises, right? In the Austria in the College of Vienna, right? And he said, we'd like for you to go. We're gonna put this trip together, and we're gonna provide them first class airfare there and back, and just take care of everything. And would you like to be a part of that? And I'm like, of course. But that wasn't the first thing out of my mouth, Felipe. The first thing out of my mouth was, well, what will that cost? And he looked at me and he said, you have cash value, right? I said, well, of course I do. He knew I did, right? And he said, well, just finance it. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So, I go to Jana, and like, hey, this is an opportunity. And she said, well, what will that cost? And I love her dearly, right? It's like, oh, I don't know. And so we go, and spend a fabulous, week or so, 10 days, whatever it was, in Austria, Vienna, Austria, one of the Nelson's favorite places on the planet. It was awesome. Him and I, Mary and Jana, walking all around. We get home, Felipe, and I ask my lovely wife, what was it worth? She's asking, what will it cost? And I did too, the next trip around, right? And I asked her, what was it worth? None of that can show up on an illustration. It just cannot. So it's the unseen that I think is much more important. Okay, so fast forward to the next year, this opportunity comes up to go to France, and it was a men's only tour, and so I go to Jana, and I'm like, man, I know, we just went to Austria last year, and Gary's putting this trip together, and I'm telling her all about Normandy and St. Lo and the Maginot Line and the Falaise Gap. If you're a Normandy student, Omaha, Utah, Sword, and all that. And I'm like, this is a big deal, and it's a opportunity here. And Jana's just like, well, we'll just finance it. Of course you got to go. And those things cannot show up anywhere on a life insurance illustration. Yes, a life insurance illustration is important. You have to understand, you got to have a basic understanding of how life insurance works, especially if you own the policy. You know, you need to understand the mechanics of that to the point in which you can be confident and enjoy and manage and use it and enjoy all the results of it. So, but it doesn't mean you have to be a life insurance expert, right? But you do have to understand the mechanics. And whenever you understand the mechanics and whenever you see what's going on, like you had mentioned earlier, you go through your numbers like really regular, you know, quarterly as a family, monthly as an individual. I'm like, my hat's off to you. Of course, you're an engineer. That's what you do, right? It's okay. Man, you should know your numbers. There's no question. But where do you can't put all of those other values anywhere on a life insurance. I mean, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that's very, very powerful, you know? So.
No, it's true, James. My son told me this weekend, he said, Dad, he's like, you know, one thing, you do a lot of stuff because you're involved in a lot of work. He said, but he's like, you really take care of us. He's like, you really do everything. He's like, Mom even says that it's impressive, like how much you do and what you provide for us. He's like, it seems limitless. And I said, that's I'm doing good work. When you get appreciation from a child, which is something that almost no parent gets, that's amazing. And I told him, I was like, that's the greatest compliment that I'm doing the right thing, is to get this compliment from you unsolicited and to have you appreciating what we're doing and the things that we can do. It's incredible. Like a friend of his that he used to train with when he was in karate as a young child is having a party, and they live in Southern California. And when it came up, you know, I didn't even ask. I just told him, yeah, we'll go. And my wife's like, how are we going to go? Like, I was like, we could drive or we could fly. She's like, it's too far to drive. It's 9 hours, which I've driven so many times. And the type of work that I do, I've done that drive. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Let's just fly. She's like, how much is it going to cost? I was like, nothing, because we're going to finance it. We're going to finance it, and over time, it'll pay for itself. And it really does. And so we're going on the trip. And of course, you know, you got to get clothes. And so we've had to go and do clothes shopping. And my son now has a suit, which he didn't have before because this is kind of a formal party. And we're just enjoying all of this process. It's just going to be fun. And now the only stress is like, he's got some group project work assignments he has to turn in on Friday before we fly Friday night. And that's the only stress we have with this trip. Like, we're going to go, we're going to give gifts, we're going to spend time, have an amazing experience. And the only stress is, will my son get his projects for school done on time on Friday before we leave? Right? Nobody's worried about what it's going to cost. And we'll have those experiences. And we can do stuff like that now because we've got financial security and we're in control of our system. You know, if you had asked me this like 8 years ago, I would have told my friend, sorry, I can't go. I can't afford it. Even though I have a high paying job as an engineer working for a large company, and I have consulting businesses and I teach courses, like, it would have been inconceivable, James. And now it's just like, of course we can, because I've done this so many times. Like, I think this year we've gone on, you know, including the trips that I've done without my family, because sometimes I've traveled without them. I think I'm approaching like 8 different trips, like significant trips where I've had like life-changing experiences in 1 year. In 1 year. It doesn't illustrate, it's unseen, James. I agree with you.
Yeah, that's powerful. And it is, you know, when...
You know, James, one thing we didn't talk about is in July, I thought I was having a near-death experience. Mm-hmm. I ended up being a kidney stone. And James, we talked about this the last time. You've had kidney stones yourself, so you know the pain that it has. So for people that don't know, I woke up at 4 a.m. with extreme pain in my inside, had no idea what it was. And it wasn't until after being admitted to the emergency room, 11 a.m. is when I got the diagnosis that it's just a kidney stone, Felipe. Nothing to worry about. It's not life-threatening. But at the time, I thought death was imminent. Yes. Like, I had so much pain. And for people that don't know, like, I I was crying like in public. Like the pain was so intense, the tears were like shooting out of my eyes, which I thought was like, I thought they were like flying out, like rain coming out of my face. Like that's how much the pain was. So much pain that at one point I vomited nothing. I had nothing in my system, but my body forced me to vomit just to deal with the pain. And I told the doctors, I was like, I actually felt good while I was puking because I couldn't feel my kidney at the time, which was incredible. But the thing I remember, and I posted about this on social media on LinkedIn, I had my wife and son with me, and I remember being laying on the hospital bed and looking at them and saying, everything's going to be fine no matter what happens, and feeling just at peace. And the whole time, and my son said too, he's like, Dad, he's like, the craziest thing about that whole experience is that you were always making jokes the whole time. He's like, you were in a good mood the whole time. He's like, we could see that you were in a ton of pain, but you were in a good mood the whole time. He's like, it didn't make any sense. Like, Mom and I, of all the stuff happening, that's the one thing we couldn't figure out. Like, why were you so in a good mood? And I said, because in those moments, I knew everything was going to be fine. Like, you and Mom were going to be taken care of no matter what happened to me. And I said, at the most critical time when I needed both of you, you were both there for me. And so I felt at complete peace. And that doesn't show up on an illustration either, James.
No, it doesn't. I'm glad you mentioned that too. It's very powerful. You know, you can't buy life insurance without a death benefit. It doesn't come any other way. And I know with the infinite banking concept, we're trying to purchase the least amount of term and have as much cash value as possible. But that is not to discount the death benefit. If you're a family member, if you have obligations, or if you have a family, you have obligations, they should be addressed. So, you know, you shouldn't build capital now at the expense of your family in the future if something unknown happens. So, and there's an absolute correct way to do that, solve for the death benefit and solve for banking. You know, at the end of the day, Nelson said, and it's true, when you solve for banking, you're going to wind up with so much death benefit, you can't get it past the underwriters anyway, which is true. But we should, no question, you know, address our obligations. And so if you're a family member, you likely need a death benefit. And you're like most of all the other average all-American families, you know, you're probably underinsured. So there's an opportunity you should correct that. And, you know, speaking of the kidney stones, yeah, it's real easy for someone to say, oh, it's just a kidney stone, you'll be okay. No, I remember the first time I had one is way back in 91 or 92, in the middle of the night. I literally thought I was going to die. As a matter of fact, you know, I guess the pain was so great. It was okay if I did die. You know, I'd be okay with that if I would have graduated then. You know, so yeah, to make light of the pain of kidney stones, and then to make light of the you know, just the idea that you're okay, you get to the point where there's some pain or whatever, you're okay to graduate, knowing that your family is going to be taken care of because of some of the things you've done. And part of that is life insurance. I've heard many times throughout my career that, you know, you get started, you know, we're going to become our own banker. And I've heard many times, Felipe, it's like, James, you know, I'm at the early end of this, and I don't have all the cash values that I could deploy yet, but I'm building them. But the fact that I have life insurance, a death benefit that I did not have before, gave me a certain amount of peace and really, you know, pride and taking care of the family. I mean, that's legitimate. That's powerful. You know, if you know, if you can take care of your family without you being here, I mean, that goes a long way for your mental mindset and the way you think. It leaves some of the, maybe some desperation out of the equation. You know, you don't have to worry about them not being okay. That goes a long way. Anyway, so thanks for mentioning that, Felipe. Look, we're coming up on a couple of hours, actually on a little over an hour and a half, and I probably need to, you know, in respect of your time, you know, find a closing And my question would be this: is there anything that you feel like you might have left out, didn't share, or that you want to share in closing? Any encouragement or just whatever, burning desire that you may have?
Yeah, for all the listeners of the show, do your research to know, but don't feel like you have to have you don't need to know everything to get started. And one of the great things about somebody like James and his team is that you can ask questions, and I call them and email them and ask questions all the time as things come up. But I'd highly recommend that if you're listening to the show and you haven't started yet, this is a great day to start. Just get started today. It's going to take time to get to this level of practice like that I have, but your only regret is going to be that you didn't start sooner. So let me help you alleviate that and just get started now. And if you're already practicing and you don't have an even distribution of age classes, or you haven't hit the limits on your insurability yet, then you've got some room to expand your system and you can go deeper into it. And so go deeper. I'm still testing the boundaries of how deep this goes and all the benefits that it is. And I'm excited to continue adventuring onto the unknowable things, the unseen things, as a benefit of doing this and practicing the system. And I can't wait to see what happens, later this year and next year.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. And I always appreciate the kind words. Thank you, Felipe, for, sharing with us and just taking the time to put yourself out in the big wide world. Although you do have a podcast, so you're accustomed to speaking to the big wide world. But thank you for taking your time and sharing with us. Okay. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, James.
Have a great day.
Thank you for joining us on the Banking with Life podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and click on that little notification bell. Otherwise, join us on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher for weekly content.